$2.2 billion in collateral. Only $1.4 billion of it was real. That was the secret inside Tricolor Holdings, and it stayed a secret until a phone rang in Italy. Daniel Chu was on vacation when the call came. On the line, a banker from JPMorgan with a simple, devastating question. The car loans you pledged to us as collateral, why do they appear to be pledged to somebody else too? 31,000 loans, promised to more than one lender at the same time. The empire had about 3 weeks to live. Tonight, how a man who promised to give credit to immigrants nobody else would touch built a $5 billion lending empire on the same cars, mortgaged twice. How he wired himself $6.25 million and bought a Beverly Hills mansion just before it all collapsed. And why, when it fell, the people who paid were not the bankers. They were tens of thousands of working families who lost their cars. This is who got rich while Tricolor died. To understand the fraud, you have to understand the promise, because the promise is what made everyone comfortable. Daniel Chu founded Tricolor in 2007 in Irving, Texas. The pitch was genuinely good. Millions of immigrants in America, many of them undocumented, have no social security number and no credit history. To a normal bank, they are invisible. They cannot get a car loan. And in America, no car often means no job. Tricolor said, "We will lend to them. We will look at the people the system ignores and we will sell them a car and finance it." The name itself was a nod to the customers, a reference to the Mexican flag and its national soccer team. It was framed as financial inclusion. Doing well by doing good. And it grew fast. Tricolor became one of the fastest growing private companies in the country. About 60 dealerships across Texas, the Southwest, and Illinois. Around 100,000 loan accounts. A loan book worth roughly $5 billion. By the end, it was one of the largest independent used car chains in the United States, and around 3/4 of its customers were undocumented Hispanic immigrants. The halo was real, and the halo is exactly what Wall Street wanted to be associated with. So here is how the money actually worked, because this is the engine. Tricolor sells a car to a family and writes a loan. That loan is an asset. It is a stream of monthly payments coming in. Now Tricolor takes that loan to a big bank, JPMorgan, Barclays, Fifth Third, and uses it as collateral to borrow cash from what is called a warehouse credit line. With that cash, Tricolor writes more loans. It also bundles those of these loans together and sells them to investors as bonds, asset-backed securities. The investors get the monthly car payments. Tricolor gets a pile of money up front to do it all again. Originate, pledge, bundle, repeat. The banks earned fees at every step. Chu got capital to grow. Everybody up the chain made money on the volume. And as long as the loans were real and pledged once, it was a legitimate, if aggressive, business. It is worth pausing on why the banks loved this. A loan to an undocumented immigrant with no credit history sounds risky, but bundled together, thousands at a time, those loans threw off a high, steady stream of payments because these were customers who needed their cars to survive and would pay almost anything to keep them. High-yield, sympathetic borrowers, a feel-good mission to point to in a press release. For Wall Street, Tricolor was close to perfect. It let them earn subprime returns while telling a story about financial inclusion. Nobody up the chain had much incentive to look too hard at the collateral, because looking too hard might end a very profitable arrangement. From around 2018, according to federal prosecutors, it stopped being legitimate, because there's one rule that makes the whole system work. One loan, one lender. The car behind that loan can only be promised to one bank as collateral. If you promise the same car to two banks, both think they are covered, but there is only one car. Prosecutors say that is exactly what Tricolor did on an industrial scale. The same auto loan pledged to multiple lenders at the same time, and when loans went bad, or when borrowers stopped paying, or when the loan did not even exist, employees allegedly altered the records by hand to make the dead and the fake look alive and current. By August 2025, the math was grotesque. Tricolor had pledged around $2.2 billion in collateral. Only about $1.4 billion of it was real, roughly $800 million of pure fiction. A later forensic analysis would find more than 31,000 loans double-pledged and nearly 7,000 loans that never existed at all, and the warnings were there. Audits in 2022 and again in 2024 flagged the problems. Incorrect payment postings, recoveries logged from repossessions that never happened, inaccurate delinquency reporting, what one description called pervasive internal control weaknesses. The red flags were waving. But the banks were earning millions in fees on the warehouse lines and the bond deals. And so, investors would later allege in court, they looked away. Think about what double pledging really means for the people involved, because it is more than an accounting trick. Every one of those 31,000 double-pledged loans was a real family in a real car, making real payments every month. That family was paying for a car they thought they owned. And behind their backs, the loan on that car had been promised to two different banks, each of which believed it had a clean, exclusive claim on the same vehicle. The borrower did nothing wrong. They never knew. They were just the raw material, the realistic-looking collateral that made the fraud look solid from the outside. Their monthly payments were the heartbeat that kept the illusion alive. Now, the part that defines this channel. While the walls were closing in, who was getting rich? In August 2025, with the fraud about to be discovered, Daniel Chu wired himself $6.25 million. Two payments, on the 19th and the 20th, moved through a deputy. About a week later, on August 27th, he bought a multi-million-dollar property in Beverly Hills. And then, roughly 3 weeks after paying himself that bonus, he put more than 1,000 of his employees on unpaid leave. Read that order of events again. The bonus came first. The mansion came second. The workers losing their paychecks came third. That is the strip mining pattern in its purest form. When a company is dying, the person at the top reaches in and pulls out as much cash as possible before the doors close. The bonus was not a reward for success. By any honest reading, it was an extraction on the way out. The end came from the bottom of the food chain, where it usually does. A junior analyst at a firm called Waterfall Asset Management was doing the unglamorous work of checking collateral and noticed the anomalies, the same loans appearing in more than one place. That observation climbed the ladder until it reached JPMorgan, and JPMorgan made the phone call to Italy. The bank pulled its warehouse line. Chu flew to New York, and the 3-week unwind began. On September 10, 2025, Tricolor filed for bankruptcy, and the type of bankruptcy tells you everything. This was not Chapter 11, the kind where a company reorganizes and tries to survive. This was Chapter 7, liquidation. The end. 18 related entities, more than 25,000 creditors, around $1.9 billion in secured debt spread across roughly 20 lenders, much of it evaporating. Then the banks counted the damage. JPMorgan took a charge-off of around $170 million. Jamie Dimon, the most powerful banker in America, called it, quote, "not our finest moment." Fifth Third disclosed an impairment in the range of $170 to $200 million. Barclays reported a loss of around $150 million. Disclosed bank losses together well over $340 million. But the bankers will be fine. JPMorgan earns $170 million in roughly the time it takes you to watch this video. For them, Tricolor is a bad quarter and an awkward sentence on an earnings call. The people who were not fine were the families, because remember who the customers were. Working class, mostly Hispanic, often undocumented, the exact people Tricolor said it existed to help. When the company collapsed, their cars did not get protected. They got repossessed or stranded. And when the assets were divided up in bankruptcy, those families found themselves standing in line behind Wall Street, fighting over the scraps with hedge funds and banks. The financial inclusion story, the whole moral premise of the company, ended with its most vulnerable customers losing the one thing that let them get to work. And it gets worse because of who these borrowers were. Many were undocumented. That status, the very thing that made them invisible to ordinary banks and valuable to Tricolor, also made them the least likely people in America to walk into a courthouse and demand their rights. They were not going to organize. They were not going to hire lawyers and file claims and show up to creditor meetings in a federal bankruptcy court in Texas. The company had, in effect, selected for victims who could be counted on to stay quiet. A predator does not pick its prey at random. It picks the prey that cannot fight back. And the same vulnerability that the company advertised as compassion turned out to be the reason the people at the top could be so confident they would never face the customers they harmed. The legal reckoning followed. On December 16, 2025, Tricolor's chief financial officer and a senior finance director pleaded guilty to charges including bank fraud, wire fraud, securities fraud, and destruction of records and began cooperating. The next day, prosecutors unsealed an indictment in Manhattan. Daniel Chu, the founder and chief executive, and David Goodgame, the chief operating officer, charged with running a continuing financial crimes enterprise. The top count carries a 10-year mandatory minimum and a maximum of life in prison. They are presumed innocent until proven otherwise. And in February 2026, a group of about 30 investors holding some $230 million in Tricolor bonds sued JPMorgan, Barclays and Fifth Third directly, arguing the banks ignored, in their words, giant red flags and collected their fees anyway. That lawsuit is the most revealing part of the whole story because of who is suing whom. This is not regulators protecting consumers. This is Wall Street suing Wall Street. The bondholders who lost money are going after the banks that underwrote the deals, each side blaming the other for not catching a fraud that was flagged in audits years earlier. Notice who was not really represented in that courtroom. The families. The fight over the wreckage of Tricolor is a fight between sophisticated financial players over how to split the losses, and the immigrant borrowers who actually lost their cars are, once again, off to the side, watching the people who profited argue about the bill. So who got rich when Tricolor collapsed? On the way down, Daniel Chu did. The bonus, the Beverly Hills house, and for years before that, the banks did, on fees from a machine that was waving warning signs the whole time. Who paid? Tens of thousands of immigrant families who trusted a company that wrapped a fraud in the language of helping them. Here is the lesson, and it is darker than just one bad man. The most dangerous frauds are not the ones that look like fraud. They are the ones that look like a good deed. Tricolor was praised. It was financed by the biggest names on Wall Street. It was celebrated for serving people the system left behind. And underneath the halo, the same cars were being mortgaged twice, and the man at the top was wiring himself a fortune while his customers slept in the cars he was about to take away. $2.2 billion in collateral. $1.4 billion of it real. The rest was a story. And the people who believed the story most were the ones who could least afford to.